What's up, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Mafia podcast. My name is Jordan Jaika, aka Dr. Fantasy, and I am here with my co host today, the Fantasy Caveman. And today we are in the middle of our NBA mini series where we are giving a recap of the 2019-2020 season, then previewing this upcoming offseason and where we think they're going to finish next year. So today's topic of conversation is the Minnesota Timberwolves. So we're focusing right now on the non-playoff teams. Obviously, the season's still going on, and we'll recap and preview those guys once their season is over. But we've already done the Warriors and Cavaliers, so today we're going to be talking about the Timberwolves. To start it off with a recap of their season, they were 19 and 45 last year, the second worst record in the West behind the Golden State Warriors, which will not happen again.
No.
Their head coach Tom Thibodeau was fired mid-season. Tom Thibodeau's kind of bounced around the past few years now and has struggled to find a home, but they actually hired Ryan Saunders, who's only 34 years old, and I expect them to keep him as their coach for the long term. He led the team to a 17 and 25 record while he was coaching. Doesn't seem overly impressive, but that's a much better winning percentage than they had previously. So, and Ryan Saunders, interestingly, I guess I didn't realize this when they hired him last season. That is Flip Saunders' son, who had a nice long coaching career. And Ryan Saunders is actually highly regarded throughout the NBA, and he's known for his player development. So he finds himself in a really interesting situation, a young team with a lot of question marks, and he has every opportunity to show his player development skills because they have a lot of players that
Yeah.
need developing.
Yeah.
So to go over their season leaders, karl-Anthony Towns only played 35 games, struggled with injuries so far in his career, but still led the team with 26.5 points, one of the best big men in the NBA. D'Angelo Russell, who they acquired for Andrew Wiggins in a Golden State Warriors trade, averaged 21.7 points, but only played 12 games. Andrew Wiggins was their second leading scorer with 22.4 points, 42 games played. Then you and I were talking just before we started a little bit about Malik Beasley. Got traded over from the Nuggets. Only played 14 games for him, but averaged over 20 points, so 20.7 points a game. So he went on a nice streak and showed some potential there. Jeff Teague was there, averaged 13 points. Juan Hernan-Gomez, who's a big guy for him. Robert Covington, James Johnson, just lots of depth pieces there. In terms of rebounds, karl-Anthony Towns averaged just below 11 rebounds. Juan Hernan-Gomez, 7.3 off of the bench and starting some games. Assists, D'Angelo Russell was 6.6. Jeff Teague with 6.1. And I just want to throw his name in there. He went to the Wizards, but Shabazz Napier had 5.2 assists a game for him. Just wanted to bring him up for the fun of it.
Yeah.
Blocks-wise, James Johnson led the team in blocks with 1.4. karl-Anthony Towns second with 1.2. Steals was Robert Covington at 1.7 and James Johnson with 1.4. So any notes that you would like to make on the 2019-20 season?
Yeah, like I said, they obviously only won 19 games, and they weren't doing too bad until Towns went down initially. Looking at it, they're actually a league worst 9-37 since the start of December. So they kind of just fell off the rails, and kind of gave up basically. Like you said, we haven't mentioned this yet, but I think the biggest thing from their season is they traded Andrew Wiggins, who we talked about in the Warriors episode, and they got back Russell, who I think is a better fit for them than Wiggins was. Mainly because they were asking Wiggins to be something that he's not. You talked about Malik Beasley. That was a solid surprise for him. I think when they got him from Denver, I don't think they weren't expecting him to be a 20-point per game scorer. Because I looked at it with Denver, he was averaging 8 points a game in 18 minutes. Like, then he goes to Minnesota, and he went up. Yeah. His point, yeah, like I said, his points per game went up to 21 in 33 minutes. I kind of lost the point I was trying to make as I was talking. That was very weird. And he did that in 14 games. And actually, going back on his first game with Minnesota, he hit 7 threes in his first game with Minnesota. So, well, I was going to be talking about him in a minute when we talk about free agency, but Malik Beasley was definitely was a very solid surprise for him. I think when they acquired him, I think they probably expected to get out of him what Denver got out of him, just kind of like that decent depth piece, not gonna do a ton, but it's just kind of silently play his role. But he did more. He definitely did more of that, and more than that when he got to Minnesota. Now we'll have to see what happens with him, and if he's with them next year, how he fares. But yeah, just a bad season overall, with Beasley being one of the lone bright spots for him.
Yeah, and I just kind of want to put an exclamation mark on Malik Beasley and Ryan Saunders. I mean, and I didn't really bring this up before, but Tom Thibodeau was 2-20 for them before they fired him. And, that's why the Ryan Saunders 17-25 doesn't seem impressive. When you consider that they were 2-20 before that, I mean, that's very impressive. And one of those interesting things to think about is, Malik Beasley wasn't really, you were right, he was more of a role player before he came to the Timberwolves. So we saw his development. Is that a piece of what Ryan Saunders does? He's known for his player development. He kind of traveled around the G League and has been an assistant coach, and players, especially young players, have really liked him. So, could we see that with more young guys? Is that what we can expect from Ryan Saunders? So I think that's interesting. I'll go now into their current depth chart right now. Starting point guard, D'Angelo Russell. Other bench pieces they have Jordan McLaughlin and Jarrett Culver. At the 2 guard, they have Malik Beasley, Jarrett Culver as their their backup. Their 3 right now is Josh Okogie with Jarrett Culver as their backup. Power forward Juan Hernangomez, who I mentioned, very solid. He's more of a role player, solid big man. James Johnson, who they have on their bench. I've always been a big James Johnson fan. He's a hustle, high energy, great defender off the bench. Big guy. Obviously, they have Karl-Anthony Towns. They also have Naz Reid coming off the bench, and James Johnson, who plays a little bit of center when they're playing small ball. But, yeah, I mean, they need to add some pieces there. I mean, Jarrett Culver is their backup at point guard, and shooting forward. So they definitely need to work on their depth there. I mean, that's kind of my biggest point. But I'll bring up their upcoming free agents and let you talk a little bit and go in depth about that. But Jordan McLaughlin's going to be a free agent. He's currently making $3 million. Juan Hernangomez, also a free agent, $3 million. Malik Beasley was only making $2.7 million. Evan Turner was actually on their payroll still, and that's going to free up $18 million for him this season. They made a ton of trades, and we brought up some of them, but they traded Jeff Teague to the Hawks, Andrew Wiggins to the Warriors, Shabazz to the Wizards. They had a lot of moving pieces this season, so that's why I keep bringing up Ryan Saunders, but that's one of the big things that I learned this season about the Timberwolves. As much as I don't think their roster is very good, I think that we saw that they have a head coach that actually knows what they're doing for the first time in a while.
Yeah, like I said, I definitely like their. Don't know if I like their future as like a team in terms of record-wise and making the playoffs, but I definitely like Flip Saunders getting the best out of these guys and getting them to compete. It's just that unfortunately they play in when you're still kind of in this stage and you play in the West, it's just not gonna go well for you. And like I said, I honestly, until I was researching this, I forgot Evan Turner was even on their was still on their payroll. So that was interesting. Like you said, you brought up their other ones. Most of them, I mean, you talked about Malik Beasley. He's restricted. So his play to finish the season, I'm going to be very interested to see what kind of money that's going to get him. And good to see. Now, I think I'd be shocked if Beasley isn't with Minnesota next season. I think the Timberwolves will match almost anything that he gets.
Yeah.
But that'll be interesting. So, unless some team, Beasley is another one of those guys that, I feel like a team might overpay for him and offer him some ridiculous offer sheet. So we'll have to see what happens there. Like you said, with Juan Hernan-Gomez, he's also a restricted free agent. And we keep going down the list. James Johnson has a player option. I expect him to pick that up. Then McLaughlin's a restricted free agent. Like, their biggest pieces outside of Towns are all free agents, which makes this very interesting and very complicated on how they're gonna navigate who they keep and who they get rid of. And then finally, I know you never, but just that Keelan Martin dude is also a restricted free agent, which I don't remember anything about him, so he doesn't count.
Mm-hmm. He doesn't matter then. Sorry.
Nope.
So yeah, I think you covered all their free agents there. So off-season needs, and I kind of already brought that up, but I mean they're probably more than any other team in the NBA. In terms of the draft, they just need to take the best player. I mean, they need kind of a lot of things. I mean, I would say the only player that doesn't make sense for them, even if it's good value, is probably James Wiseman. I mean, karl-Anthony Towns doesn't have to necessarily play down low. He actually has developed a really nice three-point shot, which a lot of people don't talk about. But I don't think James Wiseman would make a ton of sense. But they just need to acquire some talent, honestly. I mean, especially if they end up losing Malik Beasley somehow to a big offer that they don't want to match. If Juan Hernan-Gomez ends up going somewhere, James Johnson says, "Screw you guys, I'm leaving." I mean, they really just need players, bodies, and some talent. And I expect them to go through a full rebuild here, especially if they're confident that Ryan Saunders is their guy. I mean, just acquire young talent. They have a few draft picks. Acquire as much young talent as you can. And as I mentioned, they just need bodies to a certain point. I mean, Jarrett Culver's listed as their number one backup at 3 different positions. And, Jarrett Culver, he's shown okay ability. He's a depth piece to me. If you're a playoff team, Jarrett Culver.
Not even a depth.
Depth. Yeah, I mean, for me right now, from what Jarrett Culver showed, he's still young too, but he, to me, he's just a, maybe for a good playoff team, like the 9th guy off the bench, maybe. So Timberwolves, he's their 6th man, but a good team, you should be looking at, the 9th guy off the bench at this point in his career. And like I said, he's young, he can still develop, but to me, this is the kind of team, they just need bodies and as much talent as they can get.
Oh, yeah, totally. And looking at them, they were we didn't really talk about their defense was just god awful last season. Probably not Hawks level bad, but pretty close to Hawks, but not quite Hawks level bad.
Second worse.
Actually, I'm looking at it. Aside from Towns, I think you already mentioned it when you went over Jeff Bart, but Josh Okogie was probably one of might have been their best defender last season.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously aside from Towns, but he's played some solid perimeter defense. So I think that's one guy that I feel confident. And like I said, aside from Towns and aside from Russell, you could literally probably, even a Kogi, you can probably replace 10 guys. You can obviously they won't, but there's 10 guys that are just replaceable. In my opinion, they're just. And I'm gonna talk about this momentarily when we talk about draft needs. But I think aside from bodies especially that can play defense, they need another ball handler. I feel I don't know if you want to put 100% of the ball handling abilities on D'Angelo Russell. Like he's the only only guy on that team that actually can really make stuff happen when he has the ball in his hands. So I think to get another guy that can do that to take a little bit of pressure off of him would be very beneficial for him.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And you already kind of mentioned it, so why don't you go into the targets that you have in draft and free agency?
Okay, with free agency, I honestly I kind of like Enes Kanter for him. Uh, I think a lot of it is going to be contingent on what happens with Aaron Gomez and James Johnson as far as big man depth. But I just think that's what they need. Enes Kanter, is a solid. He's especially at this point, he's a solid defender, and you put you put him and Towns at the center of that, the center of that defense, and I think you're looking at decent shape there. As far as the draft goes, they're one of those teams who knows what they're going to end up picking. They have a chance at a very high pick. And this is a guy we're going to be talking about on a featured pod, but I love LaMelo Ball to the Timberwolves. I mean, you want to talk about taking the pressure off of Russell to handle the ball. You have LaMelo Ball run that offense, and then D'Angelo Russell can play more off ball, which I think is his skill set is better suited for him to play off ball, in my opinion, than to handle the ball all the time. So I think LaMelo Ball and D'Angelo Russell backcourt with Towns at the center, that would it might not make them that good, but it would definitely make them exciting to watch. Yeah. Especially on the offensive end.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think in the draft they're in a situation, and you mentioned this with the Warriors, and the same thing can be said about the Timberwolves. Is if they had the number 1 pick, I have no idea who the Timberwolves would take. Yeah. I mean, I honestly have no clue. I mean, because I could see him going Anthony Edwards, who is a little more of a scorer. LaMelo Ball, actually, I was just looking up. He's 6'8" now. LaMelo Ball. Damn. Apparently he just keeps growing. He's still only 18, but he's 6'8" now, so that's kind of crazy. So you can move him around a little bit and make him a playmaker on the outside. Obi Toppin, I mean, I could see them taking either 3 of those guys. Like I said, I don't think James Wiseman makes a ton of sense for him. I could see him pairing him up with Karl-Anthony Towns, but I think they'll go in the direction of Edwards, Toppin, or LaMelo Ball. And I mean, I really can't argue. Like I said, this is a team. I still think they need a superstar. And I really think with Karl-Anthony Towns, it might seem weird to not call him a superstar, but he's still played limited minutes. He's shown some signs of being injury prone. D'Angelo Russell's made an all-star team, but I still think they need a face of their franchise. Neither one of those guys have quite developed into that yet. So one of the things, and I didn't mention this in the Warriors, I was going to mention in our Warriors episode, but there's not a ton of superstars in this year's draft. Surefire, I'll say. Will one of them make an all-star team? Yeah, I mean, 100% one of them will develop into an all-star, but most years you're like, okay, this player, he's going to be a superstar. Everybody knows it. And, that's the number 1 pick. This year, I don't know. There's a lot of guys. I think Anthony Edwards is the top guy off my board, but I could see him just being kind of a starting role player, almost like an Andrew Wiggins kind of guy. I don't think he's necessarily a superstar, so I think that's one of the things not in the Timberwolves' favor this year, is that they need a surefire superstar, in my opinion, still, to pair with Karl-Anthony Towns and D'Angelo Russell, and I don't think they're going to find a surefire. Will they find a superstar? Maybe, but not surefire.
Well, yeah, like I said, we talked about this when we've done a couple of our podcasts about our draft prospects. You really don't know what you're gonna. Even the top guys in this draft, like LaMelo or Wiseman or Anthony Edwards or Toppin or any of the other top names, you don't know. It's gonna be hard to tell with these guys whether they're gonna pan out to be something special. And I think that's the thing with the Timberwolves. They need, like you said, they need that special guy to come in and kind of kickstart them into the future. And like I said, if LaMelo Ball lives up to his potential and as hyped as he's probably, in my the most hyped up guy that we've seen come into the draft in a while. I mean, I think he's been more hyped up than Lonzo.
Oh yeah.
And Lonzo, especially led by his dad, Lonzo was really hyped coming into the league. But LaMelo has been super hyped up. So he's a guy. Will he be able to live up to his potential? I think, as far as fits for LaMelo goes, that the Timberwolves are a great fit for him. So we'll have to see there. But yeah, not much. They need a lot. Like, they need LaMelo Ball, but even if let's say go and they get LaMelo Ball, they still need a lot, because then they just need a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a theme for them. We talked about the Cavaliers and Warriors, who have a lot to be excited for, and the Timberwolves are the first team. I don't think they have much to be excited for. At least you can say they have 2 all-star players. I will give them that, but besides those 2, I mean, they don't have much talent. I mean, you already mentioned Okogie, Jarrett Culver. Both of those guys are only 21 years old. Maybe they can develop into solid role players or serviceable starters. But yeah, I mean, at this point, and I mentioned it in a previous episode, but if I was going to list the playoff contenders in the Western Conference, I think anybody has a chance in the West to make it for that 8 seed except the Timberwolves. I just don't think they're there yet. And even, unless LaMelo Ball comes to the Timberwolves and he is a legendary superstar from day one, I just can't see it happening. So I definitely not a ton of optimism for the Timberwolves, but there's some things to be slightly positive about. Like I said, I think they found a head coach that they can build around. I think they do have a few all-star players. It's just a matter of surrounding them with some more talent.
Yeah, like I said, if LaMelo Ball comes in and lives up to the hype that he's being hyped up to, Minnesota can maybe make a tad of noise and not be the worst team in the Western Conference next season. I honestly think the only way they're not going to be the worst team is if whoever they get via draft balls out and ends up winning Rookie of the Year.
Yep.
If whoever they get, that's what I'll say. If whoever they get with their high pick, if that guy comes in and balls out to the point where he's named Rookie of the Year, then the Timberwolves will not be the worst team in the Western Conference. That's what I'm saying.
They'll be the second worst.
They might be the second worst, but they're not going to be the worst.
Yep. I would agree with that assessment. So, anything else you want to add to the Timberwolves?
No, they're just blah.
Yeah, they're one of those teams I feel like have been bad for 100 years and will never be good again. But because I remember there was so much hope with Wiggins and Karl-Anthony Towns, and it just never worked out. So I think that's all we have on the Timberwolves today. So we appreciate you guys watching another episode of the Fantasy Mafia podcast. If you don't already, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like us on Facebook at The Fantasy Mafia, and check out our website. We have lots of content going up right now, thefantasymafia.com. So we appreciate you guys tuning in, and we will see you next time.